is. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to this very special edition of The Conversation. We actually weren't going to do a show this week, but listen, there's so very much going on, and we just really need to talk about it. Now, our guest tonight, we had talked about obviously doing our full pod show about 3 weeks ago, and then of course Corona happened and it shut it down. So, but not to certainly pass up on the opportunity to have a conversation with him. I'm so excited about our guest. He is a licensed clinical psychologist, a proud 49er. Oh, which reminds me, people, happy 49 day. Shout out to all my 49ers out there. Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Today is April the 9th, hence the 49, hence the 49ers. Hence, happy 49 days. Shout out to all my proud UNCC alumni. Those of you who are currently attending UNC Charlotte, happy 49 day. All right. So our guest tonight is Brandon Risher. And in the normal circumstances, in the normal conversation, we would have a much longer show where we would dive into his background. We would certainly dive into his story to dig deeper. And we're not going to get into a lot of that. There's some things I do want you to know about him. He's going to introduce himself as well. But our topic back then that we had decided on was socio-politics. What does that mean? He'll explain that in short order. But we never really said what our topics were going to be, because in the realm of socio-politics, it really changes from day to day, hell, hour to hour. Today, from minute to minute, literally, if you were following everything that's happened in the last 24 to 48 hours. So we're going to go top to bottom, from national politics to local politics and a few things in between. But I love his perspective simply because he talks about a number of things that we don't not necessarily think about, if you will, in terms of what that means in a socio-political space. So everybody say hey to Brandon Risher.
Hey, everybody,
love the
what's
shirt.
going on?
By the way,
That's right.
we are
Politics as usual.
we're switching it up tonight, people. We're adding the vino. Shout out to Yellowtail, because it's on sale for $5 and I think 74 cents at Food Line or wherever I got it from. So that's what we're doing today.
Gotta get through it somehow.
And what you drinking, Brandon? What you drinking over there?
I am drinking Childress Muscadine wine. So, local grapes from North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So I always want to rep the state. And yeah, I like sweet wine, whatever.
Okay. So now I don't want us to go into, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Lord, and I promise that's not the Rona, y'all. I promise. But you are a proud UNCC graduate.
I am.
For both undergrad and for grad school. You went to, I think you said you originally went to Morehouse and then transferred to UNCC and then got your master's there as well. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Charlotte, born and raised.
You know, you're like a unicorn. It's not that many of you all.
We all tried to leave, man. The 80s and 90s in Charlotte were definitely different than it is now. So it was
true.
Yes.
Now, where did you go to high school?
I started at West Charlotte in '96 and graduated from East Mac when Butler Advanced opened. They redistricted the schools, so I ended up having to transfer to East Mac and graduated there in '99.
So what was your experience like at UNCC for undergrad, and how did you end up deciding on psychology?
Wow, that's interesting. So after my sophomore year, some family things occurred, so I had to move back. I took a year off of school and worked, and and then went back. And my experience was different because I was 21 when I went. So, but I'm kind of like starting over. So I'm in a dorm, and people are like 3 years younger than me in the dorm, and so being a transfer student is definitely an interesting experience. But I became an RA and was an RA throughout after 3 semesters, and that kind of really ingratiated me to the 49er spirit. And just decided to go straight to grad school and got to do a master's degree in clinical and community psychology, and just kept it going and got a job at CMC, or Atrium now, but CMC at the time.
Okay.
Right out of grad school, and just kind of started my career from there.
Okay. And so once you got your master's, explain the difference between having a psychology degree and then being a clinical psychologist. Like, what do you have to do in addition to that to have that title?
Well, a clinical psychologist, so there's various forms of psychology. You have industrial organizational, you have neuropsych, you have, statistics and research. So there's so many different aspects. So the psychology degree is much more of kind of a broader base. It kind of gives you an introduction to many forms of psychology, and you can kind of tailor your classes based on kind of what your interest is. But the clinical psychology program, it was like an accelerated PhD program. So like week one, we're doing sessions, we're doing, mock sessions. And it's really about assessment, whether it's through intellectual assessment or psychological assessments, or through the actual clinical work itself, right? Actually being in therapy. You're sitting in a chair, they sitting on a couch, they're expressing their feelings. You're trying to figure out what modality is best used for the particular person, or what best fits for you, so you can understand kind of whatever a particular person's or a couple's plight is, and then just really and just trying to really do your best to make people be better. I think people focus so much on feeling better, but feeling better can be sometimes at the detriment of you being better. So
what does that mean?
So feeling better is just, how you feel in the moment, right? It's not a projective thing. It is very much in the moment. Being better is much more projective. Like, sometimes you gotta feel some pain. If you start working out, you've worked out well if you feel pain. Right. But projectively speaking, you understand that if I feel this is kind of what comes with progress. While if you're feeling better, it's just about, well, I'll have to work out because I won't feel any pain. But there's a consequence to that. So that's what I mean. So my job and my colleague's job is not to simply focus on just kind of, as I call it, kind of commiserating with misery, but really kind of challenging those ideas so people can actually kind of progress forward. So the four aspects I have to my business is wisdom, enlightenment, strength, and growth. So usually people come in, they want to understand about the world. Why is the world treating me this way? So they want to be knowledgeable about the world. The enlightenment is acknowledgement of oneself and how they impact the world. And then strength is, actually getting stronger, but it's for the purposes of growth. You want to be different and a better version of, who and what you are, as opposed to just simply being strong. Like, I think particularly when we get into this a little bit with Black and brown people, we focus way too much on being strong and not growing.
Right. Okay. And so you're in private practice now?
I am. I'm the owner of Risher Counseling and Wellness Center in South Park area. We opened February of 19 and still going strong.
Excellent. Okay, so let's just dive right into it. So
it.
T-shirt says politics as usual. What is the different? Well, what is socio-politics for somebody who may not know what that is?
Well, the way I define it is how politics influences society.
Okay.
So the influence of policy, politicians, the aspect of kind of reconciling the difference between the individual and the collective, whether it's a community, city, nation, state, whatever, and how it actually affects society. Like what directives does a particular policy or politician want the community to actually kind of, what lane do they want to be in? So how does politics affect the day-to-day operations of how society operates?
Okay, so topic one.
All right.
Okay, no, we're gonna start locally first. So
Okay.
locally today, Roy Cooper signed another executive order that dealt specifically with the issue with retail, and has finally limited the number of people in stores. So a store can only let in 20% of whatever its fire capacity is, like whatever their capacity is as determined by the fire marshal. So they can only let in 20% and they have to mark that. Now, as far as doing one-way lanes, that's something that is encouraged but not required. And then, of course, marking off that 6-foot difference. Now, I think we all know, or maybe don't know, that in some of the stores that have been packed, like Walmart, I don't know if Target's necessarily had that issue, Lowe's, other places where there have been, at least locally, some people who have ended up testing positive for the coronavirus. That's been a big deal. That won't actually start until Monday. Now, why do you think it is? Because again, I want you to kind of approach it from a psychological a psychological perspective in terms of how people think, but
Sure.
also from a perspective of what does that mean for us? Because a lot of these things that we need to tackle tonight are really going to be imperative for us to deal with in our own communities. So that's the first thing. So do
Okay.
you think, so we all talk about retail therapy. Sometimes half people don't go that go to the Lowe's or packed in the Lowe's. Is it because they're looking for something to do or somewhere to go, or is it because they have time on their hands and they're tackling those home projects and some of those other things that they haven't had time to do before?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, but it's really for the purpose of keeping oneself kind of mentally occupied. I think so much of our society is based on the idea that a third of our life is doing something, right? Having some purpose driven aspect to ourselves, right? Work is usually one third to kind of, 40% of our life as
Mm-hmm.
an adult. So we're just used to that. So yeah, so feeling that you can do something, like now it's like, oh baby, I was gonna get to that. And now it's like, hey, well, what's up? You can get to it now. And it's like, oh hell. But I think, yeah, I think it's a way of distraction. I mean, I think what people are seeing is how much work not only is this purposeful, but how much of a distraction that it is from all the other things that you deal with. And I think now you see with couples being at home all the time, you're just like, oh my God, like I didn't realize like how much I needed to get, whether it was my ego fed because I'm good at what I do or something like that. So so just people are just trying to get out just to find some purpose. And I think a project-based thing, it gives you something tangible from which you can say, okay, I accomplished this because it's right there in front of you. The byproducts of your effort is there.
But isn't that healthy though? A
No, it
healthy
is healthy.
distraction? Okay.
It's healthy if you integrate it with the larger context of what's going on in your particular home.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're distracting yourself at the expense of your wife or your kids or your partner, whomever, then yes, in theory, it is a noble endeavor, but there could be a byproduct of, well, this is at the expense of, my wife or my family. So this may be a great opportunity for people to get to know each other differently, but they're distracting themselves because they're like, nah, I don't know you differently because the lack of knowledge is what keeps us together, not me knowing you in a more intimate way.
Mm. Now you also actually let's no. Let's just get to the heart of it. Okay, so we all know, regardless of who you supported, Bernie Sanders is out, announced
Uh-huh.
yesterday. Clears the pathway to Joe Biden becoming the Democratic nominee.
Hmm.
That in and of itself is a big deal because of obviously some of the conflict between the two candidates, but not really, because if you looked at the last debate, there wasn't that much difference in terms of ideological things on the low end. What I find
Hmm.
compelling is that everybody was hollering about socialism this, socialism that. Oh my God, how could we do this? You got a stimulus is based on a
Yes.
socialistic principle. Give me
Right.
my money,
Right.
which is not really your money because you're taking it, you're gonna have to basically give it back in your next tax return.
That's right.
Side note, if you owe child support, you gets nothing.
It's a
If you
wrap.
didn't file in 18, you gets nothing. And if you don't, they don't have your direct deposit. Oh, you probably won't see that until this summer because they can only send out but so many checks on a daily basis. There's 330 million Americans. There's only so
Right.
much they can send out on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So, anywho, but the point of all that is that Bernie's out. Now, I do want folks to chime in on this, particularly if you were a Bernie supporter, or if you're a Joe supporter. Like, what is it that Joe? Well, first of all, let me ask the question differently. What is it that you think is important for Bernie Sanders supporters to embrace at this point? Because they got to go through their grieving process, like all of us have.
Yes.
Because,
Hmm.
like, I grieved when Tom Steyer dropped out because that's who I support, and everybody's kind of
Yeah.
grieved their own way when other candidates dropped out. But what would you say for anybody who is going through that process? Because now the reality is Joe or nothing. So now
Hmm.
what?
I mean, I would say to that point, the grieving process is really important. But seeing, did you support the man or the ideology?
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to sociopolitics, what's more important, the collective or the individual? Right? This can't be a hit to your ego that he dropped out. And from what I understand, he's still keeping himself on the ballot so he can have some influence on the agenda for
Mm-hmm.
the for the convention, which I think is unusual and a little selfish, but neither here nor there.
Why?
Because particularly at this time, if people feel that Trump getting out of office is that important, I mean, it's picking the lesser of two evils. So you have to support because it's a zero-sum game. Either you vote or you don't. And who you vote for is really important. So it's like, okay, I have to pick what's better, not what I want. And one thing that's great about America, but also kind of something that has a difficulty is what do I do for me versus the whole? You know, like a lot of people who supported Trump said, I don't like him, but he's going to decrease my taxes. And the noble intent of, well, I'm doing what's best for my family is always an American justification for any action that we do, regardless of the potential consequences or the effects of it. Now, I didn't support Bernie just because of universal health care and the way he implemented it. Like, that didn't make any sense. It was unrealistic. And I think the coronavirus or COVID-19 is really illuminating the holes and the flaws of his argument.
Stop right there. What do you mean?
Oh, okay. Well, sips wine.
Yeah, sip on that. Sip on that. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. You said there are 330 million people in the United States, correct?
Right.
I think as of right now, it's 450,000 that have been tested positive for coronavirus, with about 16,000 dead. Well, we're trying to bend the curve because that there's not enough infrastructure, whether it's people or space, to occupy all of the people who are being tested. Now, mind you, the people who are being tested are people who are going to the hospital and are sick enough and audacious enough to go. So imagine one day that every 330 million people get insurance at the same time, like that.
But it's not 300. Let's be fair, though. It's not going to be 330. It's that gap of people who aren't going to be, well, as far as if it was a universal policy.
I'm saying on the idea of universal health care.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
So you have to assume that anything you implement that is going to be for the good of people, that people are actually going to partake in. And one of the reasons that you see that 70% of the people who are dying from COVID-19 are African American or Black and brown people. Why? Because they're sick. They're really, really sick. And they have underlying issues. And they have, number one, a mistrust or distrust of the healthcare system. And two, a lot of times not insurance or the financial means to actually go through all the things that they need to go through to get well. So let's say 1% of the population actually takes that offer and says, you know what? Oh, wow, I can go to the doctor now. That's 3.3 million people like that. Where we don't what I think should be done is that we have an infrastructure bill that's commensurate with an increase in people who are being covered. So like Dwight Eisenhower did with the highway system, you have a 40, 50-year plan and you implement, as you build more infrastructure, you build more medical schools, you build more PA programs, you build more MP programs to meet, and because you're exponentially increasing the demand. But healthcare workers, and I am one of them, me having 1,000 more people at my disposal does not mean anything to me because I can only work so many hours. So unless I want to charge more money, right? But if it's a universal healthcare system, I don't get to dictate what I charge unless I get the option to opt out. So me seeing more people is going to wear me out, and now I'm not going to be mentally and physically healthy enough to do what I need to do with the other 2/3 of my life, which is sleep well and take care of my family. So if we're seeing this with 456,000 people, how are you going to instantly create a system where all of these people now have access to insurance, and you have to assume just 1% takes advantage of it? And what is going to, and you're going to realize how sick they really are. And now you have the moral and ethical obligation to treat them. So
now, go ahead.
No, that's it.
So, okay, that takes us then to what's going on in Chicago, which I hope does not become, I sincerely hope this does not become a case study of what is going to happen in metropolitan and urban areas across the country. So if you haven't been keeping up with it, Chicago's rate has gone up. It's just insanely high now. And what is it's shedding a light on a couple of things. One is that statistics are showing that 70% of the deaths in Chicago are Black and brown folks. And the problem with that is that even in New York, where we have a smaller percentage of the overall deaths. I think I read, yeah, in New York, we are 22% of the population in New York, but 28% of the deaths of COVID so far. They're at over 6,000. That's like over two times the number of people who passed away as a result of 9/11. Now, the mayor there is shedding light on some of the economic and some of the economic disparities. Dr. Fauci, who is my boy, I still say you need to cover him. Cover him, Lord.
Yeah, exactly.
Every day, he need to just be. They need to put some elderberry on his pulse point. Make sure he all right, because really. But
Yeah.
no, but all jokes aside, like it's serious. And then what I was really stunned to learn today, as I was thinking about this particular show, is what's happening in the jails. Because and I know I'm there's two issues I want you to address. First is going to be the disparity issue. The second is going to be what's actually happening in jails. In Chicago alone, they have had in their local jails 250 people testing positive, inmates, and another 150 people who tested that were employees of some sort. Right. And the concern that we've had here in Charlotte and has been the result of some of the efforts that some of the attorneys and some other local organizations have had is to remove people who are low risk, nonviolent misdemeanors, nonviolent felonies from the system, because they're at a greater risk of contracting it. I mean, Chicago is literally the largest single source of infection in the country. That was the statistic that was released today. Like, wow. That jail is the largest single source.
So Cook County.
Yeah. That particular jail is the largest single source. And what's scary is that this isn't coming from the inmates that were already there. This was obviously coming from people who were coming in from other places and contracted it and brought it into the jail in some way, shape, or form, whether it was somebody who was coming in through arrest processing or somebody who are obviously the employees that are coming in and contracting it out in their communities and then bringing it in. And so those numbers are today. Oh, it's going up. And there's no real sense of, okay, so now what do you do? Do you let people out who should have been let out weeks ago because they are only in because they can't afford bail? Or do you take that risk and start releasing people into the public who obviously they're not going to release if they're positive, but you still got to treat them. So, all right. So two issues. All right. So first, from a socio-political perspective, I got a real problem with, how should I say it? I'll just say it. I got a real problem with people blaming the disparities in the medical field or the medical treatment of African Americans, particularly with COVID, pointing only to underlying issues. Oh, Black people are more often will have diabetes and high blood pressure and asthma and all these contributing factors. And it's like you're glossing over the fact of the systemic racism that got them there, the systemic issues that dealt with the fact that the treatment that they didn't get or they should have gotten, or knowing how to advocate for their care, or worse, the food that we're eating is killing us. The food that we're eating is killing us. And
I can add something to that.
Okay.
Gentrification.
Talk about it. Oh, wait, might go step on some toes. Go ahead.
That's fine. Well, each generation has a moral and ethical responsibility to the environment in some way. For the baby boomers, it was land. I want to have as much land as possible, so the value of my home is that, right? So they went out to the suburbs, and then you had redlining and all that other stuff. And 485 is basically a red line, and just like every other bypass, right? Particularly if you go to Chicago and Detroit, it is so clear. They were like, we got to get the hell out of these Black neighborhoods as fast as possible. Let's get this 70 miles an hour. And get to Deer Park as fast as possible. Well, now my generation or our generation, right, late 30s, 40s, stuff like that. Now we value the environment. So we go closer to work. But as a byproduct, the people who used to live in the neighborhoods in the inner city are now being pushed out. So you have more and more people living in fewer and fewer real estate. So they're going to be closer. So regardless of all these underlying issues, it's just a matter of space. And the more people you put in a closer environment, that's why crime rates go up. That's why you have something. If a virus is something that is heavy, that can, populate something really fast. If you go to a housing project, it's nothing for somebody to go out and 15, 16 people go through it, because they are such a communal endeavor. Like, I live in an apartment complex in South Park. I don't talk to nobody. But if you in the hood, as a matter of
Wait a minute, you
protection,
antisocial?
no, it ain't that. It's just that I
I'm
live with a
kidding.
whole bunch of old white people. So so as such, I don't have to necessarily interact, but in a lot of these neighborhoods or like prisons, yeah, you do interact with people a lot. So you're just going to be closer. So as a byproduct of that, you're just going to have these particular things on top of all the things you just mentioned. So gentrification is a byproduct of this too, that I don't think people want to talk about.
And I think they have to. And I think, well, it's not, we have to, and we have to talk about how the systemic racism issue has been a problem. But we have to also, as people of color, talk about how our own misinformation has been a problem. I know everybody out there watching at some point saw the memes about when this first came out. We can't get it. We
Right.
protected by melanin. If you grew up drinking out of a water hose, you're not gonna get the corona. If you got that strong ginger ale, you're not gonna get the corona. If you Nettie, I'm about to call you out. If you drank water through a wet washcloth, you're not gonna get the corona. Like, it was some of the most ridiculous things
What if
that
you
we
smoke
laughed
Newports,
at.
you don't get it? Like, what? That's
Yeah,
stupid.
like, and we laughed at it. Everybody saw the memes. Hell, some of us shared it, and just thought it was funny, but we didn't know. And it wasn't just a thing in our community, but we just legitimately didn't know. And I think that in part of what you were seeing is that there wasn't the ability to get the information out there sooner. And then, of course, the failure of the administration, all that's a whole nother subject. But what do you think from a socio-political perspective? Like, we traditionally, you said this earlier, just have a general distrust of the medical field, the system in general. Not going until it really hurts, or something's falling off, or something's bleeding or rotting or something. We just don't. And I don't think it's necessarily it's an ignorance issue. I think historically it is a problem, because we haven't forgotten Tuskegee experiments. We haven't forgotten all of the things that were done to Black women to make them infertile here in North Carolina.
Yes, yeah,
Like,
here
we
in North
haven't
Carolina,
forgotten
yes.
that. We haven't
or
forgotten that.
the medical experiments in Colombia that were done for years on pregnant women, trying to reattach their hymens, and people, women bleeding out. Like, that's, yeah. So
Yeah.
there's been quite a bit of experiments throughout the years. Absolutely.
So that being said, how do we address that, or can we address it?
I think we do. So one thing that I try to say is we have to give grace to the ones who can't speak, and we have to empower the ones who can.
Oh, say that again. That's deep.
So,
Okay, wait, drink on that. Drink on that, and then say it again.
we have to give grace to the ones who can't speak and empower the ones who can. And what I mean by that is, in this age of social media, everybody has a voice, but everybody doesn't have or empowered to have a voice that is something that can go and be better for the people. If you see almost any other group of people, maybe Jewish people are maybe the exception, when they talk about a topic, there's never a preacher in it, almost ever. They have experts, right? Our experts are preachers in a lot of cases, and they're going to spread a word based on their, for lack of a better term, agenda. And their agenda is, Christianity, Jesus, whatever. We need to be able to say, who do we go to who are experts in our field, who look like us, that we trust, and what is it that we trust about them, and what they have. So, like, you went to school for a particular expertise, right? So for me to say that I know more about law than you do is stupid, because I have to trust that you got the requisite training in order to be able to say things that can help me, because you can do something that I can't. So we have to, as a people, just number one, to really talk this out. Like, to say, yo, man, like, I'm relatively young and healthy. I have to assume I have it. I have to assume I'm asymptomatic. Now, that sucks. I can't see people. I can't see my family. I can't see this. But I'd much rather not see them now than I can't see them at all, because I'm asymptomatic. Now, if we want to have an ego, let your ego be the thing that humbles you. If you think you're healthy, you just have to assume you have it, and you might give it to someone. So act accordingly. Like, project this out. Like, what I hear so many times when I deal with patients is that 2%. Well, this is possible, and it's like, well, but what's probable? Right now, the testing is as low as it is because they're not testing everyone. It is a
Right.
self-selected process. We have to assume, like, we have to use our knowledge base and get out to the people like, hey, there's a lot of people who have this. If more people who are dying are African American, that also means that they're sure they're relatively different strains, or people's immune system has it differently. You need to understand the etiology of it. How does it affect your body? How does a virus affect your body versus a bacteria? All of these things, and talk these things out. Like, I can't help you if you're doing all the math in your own head. I'm not psychic. So we have to talk this out, and have to talk about the fear. And yes, we can rely on the Lord, but hell, the Lord gave me the ability to go to school and learn what I learned. The Lord gave you the ability to do the same thing. So we also have to trust in the institutions that are there, so that we can be like, this is a BCAD type of situation. Like, after this is over, we will not be the same. This is going to be a market reset, both economically and sociopolitically and psychologically, emotionally, whatever. We need to understand the gravity of what this is. And if you see, well, there's a bending of the curve, it's like, yes, because it's a self-selected process. The people who are going to the doctor, who would normally go to the doctor, that's going to start to slow down eventually. But it doesn't mean that people aren't going to have it. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to spread it. And we have to understand the gravity of this, because if we do not, and we go out in the summertime, we will have another curve, because that's just what statistics looks like. And then if we have to shut down the economy twice, that's how other countries take over. If you look in history, where every superpower has become a superpower, is because another superpower, or the incumbent superpower, made a grave mistake, and somebody was able to swoop in. So we have to understand the gravity of this, and particularly us as Black people, we have to understand, like, we have more mediums for knowledge than ever before, and yet we focus on fewer things than ever before. We have to use this as an opportunity to call each other out, and to say we need to help each other so that we can get through this, so we can progress for generations to come.
And I think that's super important as you scroll through your feed, the conspiracy theories, the misinformation, people who, are spouting knowledge in the realm of as in the realm of medicine that's just not rooted in fact. And I think the thing that's really scary is that you have the yam who is coming on every day lying. Like, let's just, like, everybody, oh, it's just not true, or it's misleading. No, it's a lie. It's a lie. And we had talked about this. You remember how and I remember posting about it, actually. One of the first briefings, he came out in a jacket. I'll never forget it. In a jacket, that blue USA cap. And it was a complete show. I think he answered like 2 questions, and it was a complete S show. It was a shit show. It just was. And then he like scurried off. And then it was just like a whole lot of, okay, well, it's not that bad. Because I remember that's when we had 15 people at that point who had passed away. Just 15. And he said, oh, it's 15 people now. The numbers are going to go down. And then suddenly it's going to disappear, and blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, now it's between 5 and 5:30, and these things are lasting an hour, and most of it is him. And it's using it as political grandstanding. But beside all that, I know you can't, as a professional, you can't diagnose someone. He's not a patient, you wouldn't know. But what would you say about his complete lack of empathy? What does that tell you?
So I would, without diagnosing, I would say that is sociopathic-like behavior. I think that can, prevent me from being sued. And just narcissism. I mean, narcissism in the textbook sense.
Which is what? Because people throw that word around a lot, and they don't know what it means.
So to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder is that it is like it's almost like a delusional form of confidence in oneself, and that people are lower than they are. There is a level of hierarchy that they need. It's like they're almost like godlike figures in their own mind. right?
Mhm.
So if I'm God, how can you tell me something of value that's different than what I already believe? I'm omniscient, remember? So how are you going to tell me something that is greater than what I already believe? If you listen to the language that President Trump uses, he uses language that is vague. So you can't really pin him down specifically because it's like, well, I feel, it may, it's something like that, which you can always question. And that's something that narcissists are really good at. They're, con man is, con is short for confidence.
Mhm.
He's a confidence man. You instill confidence in people because more than anything, that's what people want. They want to feel good that you have it, regardless of the data.
Mhm.
And that's what he understands, I think, better. I think that's what Hitler understood. I think that's what Mussolini understood. I think that's what Genghis Khan understood. Like all of these people who, like, if you instill enough confidence and you project enough confidence, enough people are not going to pay attention to the specifics of what you're saying. So when he does these briefings, he's like, like the thing when he was talking about Easter. I would love for to open on Easter. He didn't say we're going to open on Easter. He didn't say we're doing everything in our power to make sure that happens. He was like, no, I would. He's putting two ideas together, going to church. And he's like, you all do the math on your own. I'm just going to give you the variables. And that's what he's really, really good at. Like it's stunning how good he is at that. But we need to have the media can only be but so respectful. And that's what he understands. A narcissist understands this. They understand the game better than most people. Which means they understand how to exploit it better than most people. Right. And so as an example, he knows that the media is not going to, out of respect for the awesomeness of his office, they're not going to really like question him, but so much. And it's time. If I have an hour to talk and I spend 15 minutes just kind of dancing around the topic, I only have 45 minutes left to speak. So he's doing time and words, and he's really great at that. If you watch Meet the Press or anything like that, and you hear a politician talk, they understand that. I got 5 minutes. So I'm like, you know what? That's a great question, Yolanda. I'm going to really think about that. And as I think about that, and they just keep going on and on and on. They're like, well, we got to go. So that's the game, and he is great at it. But as a populace, we need to understand that this is what game is, and this is how we have to then counteract that. I saw a guy a few days ago. I was walking, and I was dressed for another podcast, and he was like, hey, young man, what are you doing? I was like, I'm a psychologist. He was like, what is that? And I was like, all right, how the hell am I going to explain this? I said, my job is to put people on games so they can live better lives.
Mm.
Like that's really at the end of the day what my
Okay.
job is. My job is to put people on games so they can understand and then use it to their advantage, not in a malevolent way or malicious way, but in a way that's going to better themselves. So, and part of that is being a skeptic. Part of that is understanding statistics. Statistics is storytelling with math. That's all it is. It's just storytelling. So every story has a narrative. So we have to, as a populace, educate the populace to say, this is how you look at data. This is what the data is. Why are they using percentages as opposed to real numbers? Why are they using real numbers as opposed to percentages? And understand the difference and listen to the people who actually knowledge as opposed to saying, well, ain't nobody, I mean, he ain't better or she ain't better than me. And then you dismiss everything that comes with that, because as a result of this, then you have people throwing like, coronavirus parties and shit like that. And you're just like, what are you doing? Because they think they're their own version of that narcissist or that sociopath, because they like, hey, I can do whatever I want.
And so one thing that he's doing that is obviously sending red flags, but I frankly blame this on privilege, and white privilege specifically. Well, what other privilege is there but white privilege? Let's just keep it real. That is. But you see where he the report came out from Christy Grimm, who is the Inspector General's Office of Health and Human Services, basically talked about our hospitals are not getting what they need. There's not enough PPE. There's not enough of anything. This is terrible. Trump goes on. Oh, I can't believe I said it. I ain't mean to say his name. The Yale gets on Twitter and calls it a fake dossier. Like, it's wrong and it's a fake dossier, and they didn't interview enough people, and it's just insane. Or of course, when he waited till last Friday night, lets Michael Atkinson go, who was the Inspector General over the funding issues for the pandemic funds, who was put in place and voted on by the other inspector generals. Christy
Right.
Grimm was the Yams appointee in January. It's just January 2019. It's just madness. And I think there's very few people in the media that will call it what it is. There's a few journalists that'll say that's a lie. They won't pussyfoot around and say, oh, that's part of the truth, or he's been in the truth, or that's not exactly true. Well, I mean, all you got to do is look at the quotes and the numbers, and it just speaks for itself. Now, that being said, if you're seeing the hints, if Health and Human Services Inspector General is out, the person who's in charge of oversight for the pandemic funds out, you're pushing a drug that's not been tested or given any validity, and you're or at least telling us that you're ordering it by the goo gobs based on a pharmaceutical company that your family has a stake in. So it's not like he's at the point he just does whatever he wants because he knows nobody's going to say anything or somebody will report on it. But that's as far as it goes. What does that mean for us when we're looking at this in a broader way? Because I think some of us are just so tired of the news, we don't want to turn on the news anymore. And when we stop doing that, we stop being aware. We stop being aware of what's going on, and we're not paying attention to the clues, and we're not talking about it. We're not informing and educating other people. And then here we are. Next thing we know, it's November. And
yeah. And I think he'll give a stimulus check probably in October.
Oh, yeah. There'll be another
because
check.
He just knows you need to feel good about him the day you vote.
Right.
So right now it doesn't really matter to him. And he also understands this. People watch CNN with the sound off. So those things that he's saying don't really catch in the same way. They're just seeing the numbers. So, and I think CNN and most news outlets do that too, because they want raw figures, right? Because that's easily understandable, easily digestible. So the things that he is saying is really irrelevant to most people because most people aren't listening to him. They just see a guy who looks tanned and looks like he's okay, talking confidently. And that's what most people kind of understand. They don't want to, you have to invest in the things that are important to you. So if knowledge is important to you, you'll invest in it. And you have to invest time and an understanding and being inquisitive. Like I was talking to a friend of mine and I was talking about when Bernie Sanders dropped out and how upset I was. They're like, oh, but how was your day? And I was like, whoa. No, this is way too important. My day is irrelevant right now.
Right.
Way too important just because you want to feel good and have a light conversation. And I think particularly us as Black people, we don't know how to have in-depth conversations and call each other out. Like I love the fact that you even said on your Facebook Live that we don't agree on everything, which is true. And the fact, but we can challenge each other so we can both be knowledgeable coming out of it at the end better than we were when we went in.
Right.
But what people try to do, and I think this is again what social media does, it has a self-selective process where everybody tends to look at the people who already agree with them and no one gets caught out on their shit. And you just get more entrenched in this belief system and it calcifies and and it goes on and on and on. And then when somebody says something that's to you, like, then you focus on how you feel because you have no energy to be able to decipher to. So that's something I also say in therapy. I want to say real quick is this. You have to understand what's funny and ridiculous so that you can understand what's profound and serious. You have to be able to separate the two. If you don't, you'll take everything seriously or you'll take nothing seriously. And in certain things, there are ridiculous aspects. You have to kind of, it's like a communication filter. I understand what he is saying, but I have to filter out the meat of what this is, because that's the thing sociopolitically that's going to affect me on a day-to-day or year-to-year or my kids or my grandchildren, even when I'm gone. So we have to be better, I think, as a populace to be able to educate people on this is how you need to understand what is being said, because otherwise it is very easy to push that power button and turn it off and then go back to your feed and enjoy people sending thirst trap pictures. So,
oh, wait, shots fired.
Yes, it's like, oh, I'm in a bikini. It's like, Tuesday. You're like, what?
Hey, wait a minute. I've done that. Watch your mouth.
Hey, but if you at a beach, but if you at the house, that's different. You're like, you live in an apartment. Right. You're like, yeah, you live in an apartment. You ain't going to no damn pool. It's all
that's
of it's closed.
Yeah.
But anyway, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about sociopolitics in the age of COVID-19, tackling some of the issues already of racial disparities, talking about the YAM right now, in terms of what we're seeing on the press briefings, but also some of the things that we can do and we need to do individually in terms of challenging ourselves and challenging each other. Hey, cuz, I saw you just came in. Beverly, hey, girl. Netta, I see some other people that have joined. Feel free to chime in, drop your questions there because we can see the comments as they come in. So next topic. We're doing good, Brandon. We hadn't fought yet. Although, wait, yes, we are. We're getting ready to fight.
Okay.
That you told me, I think after maybe the 5th or 6th press briefing, and he announced the social distancing measures, and you text me and I about lost it. So I don't want to hear that shit right now. I'm trying to lay down.
I don't even remember what I said.
Oh, I remember.
Okay,
you said
well,
something about this is gonna make him look like a hero. Oh no, you said you reiterated that how he's gonna win in November, and that this is gonna make him look like a hero because he finally adopted the social distancing principles and talked about all that. And I was like, get off my phone. I don't want to hear that. Save that foolishness for the show. But what I thought was really interesting is we were talking about like how people perceive it. And I think I said something to the effect of, but Corona, that the face of Corona, like people who voted for him are now angry. Like the college educated white women that got him elected are mad. They or somebody they know has been affected or has been in the healthcare profession or has seen how this has affected them in their pocketbooks, their mental, all of that. And they're at least seeing where this could have been avoided. Not obviously in its entirety, but the scale of what we're dealing with could have been avoided if we had taken measures, like real measures, very early on, if the science hadn't been ignored. And the one thing I said, I vaguely remember saying is that, and the thing is at that time, and I think it's still true, the face of Corona was white. Like if you were watching any news station, it was all like, it was white families. It was white doctors, white nurses, white. If you saw like the story, like a lengthy story about someone who was younger that died from Corona, they were all white. Right. And so I think it fed into this false narrative is that it wasn't affecting our communities the same way, which was far from the truth. But I also think it highlighted the fact that the anger is not coming from Black folks, because that's not news. We've been mad at him. We've been dealing with, 400 years of systemic racism. We've been dealing with it. We've been dealing with disparities, been dealing with foolishness and folk lying and carrying on, but it's different. And we've been dealing with economic disparities, but it's very different because it's now affecting mainstream America in a way that they didn't expect. You see what I'm saying? And so do you think that's still true? Because now we're just now talking about racial disparities within the last couple of days. And we've only been really a month into this. We're like a month or so into this. That's it.
Right. I would say the racial disparities are actually going to do the opposite of what you're talking about. If you move the narrative to Black people, then white people can stop thinking about the face of this being white. So we need to in the narrative. So if these college educated white women, you're basically asking them to betray their husbands in the voting booth. That's essentially what you're asking them to do, right? Okay. Which, I mean, I don't know how many people of other races are like, yeah, I can date somebody of a different political party, but politics be important to me. So that's what we're really asking. I think that's what Trump really, I think that's what Trump's advantage was. He was like, these women ain't gonna, because they're white first. They're not women first. They're white first. They're white women, not women who are white. So they're like, yo, at the end of the day, if this helps my husband, it allows me to chill or do whatever I want to do, open my own business, that's fine, because I'm not thinking about other people. So I think if anything, we need to continue to push the narrative forward for the people who have power and real influence to say, yo, this is affecting you. Right? Because people who can work from home are great. And a disproportionate people of Black and brown people can't work from home.
Right. We're the essential workers.
We are the essential workers. We're, so, but if your husband can work from home, you're just like, okay, I just got to see you more. But this is the nuisance. So I think that we have to continue to push this narrative that because when has talking about the plight of Black people helped Black people? I mean, tell me,
right? Not in a bubble.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Tell me when in history that's happened. It's not like it was like Black people woke up one day. It was like, I don't know, the slavery thing is, this ain't cool. Hey, mister, I'm gonna holler at you for a second. Like, like this has always been a thing. And like progress is never the people who are the recipients of the disparity in power. The progress is in the people of power. So it's like we're not making progress. They're recognizing the progress that has already been there for us. Right. And I think that's something that we have to understand. Like, no, we're not making progress as Black people because we've always been there. We've always been able. Hell, Frederick Douglass could have been president. Right. Like that. We've always had the ability to be great. It's the people in power's willingness to accept that and see the advantage of us being in power, because it has to hit their bottom line too. That's what a hierarchical society does. So I think whether it's that, but so we have to continue to push this narrative though. Like, yeah, this is affecting everyone. So me seeing Lakeisha's who baby died, that shit flows over me.
Mm-hmm.
Like seeing like, oh, my mother is sick, and no amount of money that I have is going to influence whether she gets well or not. That's the difference. And I think that's the narrative that we have to push. The disparities are always going to be there because part of the comfort is knowing that I'm better than someone else. Not that I'm good, but that I'm better than. And that's what our capitalist society does. So, for example, you're talking about the jails in Cook County. So let's say they release those prisoners, right? Those low offender, parole violees or people who can't pay their bail. Just think about when this is over, how many people are going to be arrested because they need those jails filled. They need them filled, right? So they'll go right back to saying, okay, yeah, we did this noble thing. Don't you see that we did something? So there's a psychological concept called moral reasoning. So the biggest example of this. So white people voted for Obama, felt good about themselves, and then we get Trump. They're like, oh, now I can regress back to the mean. I can go back to because I've done something good now. I've volunteered, so now I can speed. So like that's what's going to happen. So you'll see this nobility, you'll see this coming together of people, but wait when May comes and rent is due again, and you ain't prepared for that. And you're going to see all the disparities come out. You're going to see all the black market stuff come out. I was making a joke. I was like, the side piece industry about to be on and popping in May because they like, yo, rent's due.
I quit you.
Like rent's due. Like, yo, man, what about your wife? Come on now. We gotta get this going. You don't quit me, I quit you. Like all of this stuff is going to be impacted. And until we understand how deep rooted and how tenuous our whole socioeconomic structure is, we will just take things in a vacuum and look at them and dissect them within the vacuum as opposed to understanding the larger sociopolitical context.
So my cousin Douglas asked a question. I'm gonna put it up here because I don't know if you can see it. So how would you go about addressing the health issues in the Black community? We kind of already talked about that a little bit, but I think we need to look at it from a standpoint of education, because some of the economic disparities and all that, I don't think we can really, I mean, that's a whole institution that you're talking about dealing with. But what about just the basic information? Because the way I would answer that, we have to go where people are gathering their information. Unfortunately, it's social media.
Yes.
It's not newspapers, it's not magazines anymore, it's social media. So it's a matter of doing things to start to put that information out there. But how do you reach the people who need that information the most if you're not friends, or if you're not, putting that information out there? Because like I was joking about the whole, if you got ginger ale, you good. You're not gonna get the Rona.
And I got the bowl too, so I should be great.
Right. And so like if you ate gummy cheese, you ain't gonna get the Rona, just ridiculous stuff like that. But all jokes aside, like how do we go about addressing that issue? And from a medical perspective for you, because your perspective is socio-political, but you also talk about like how we gather information and how we absorb it and how we spread it to other people. How do we disseminate it? What would you suggest? How would you suggest we address that?
So you use the mediums that are available, right? And for us, a lot of it is social media. So these influencers who have worked really, really hard to get their numbers up, that now you can say, well, if you want to be an influencer, this is how you can become an influencer. So you use their page as somebody who's an expert on their field on this to educate the populace, to reach as many people as possible. So it's like, I would like to offer my platform in order to educate the populace, because Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, they have, statistics, they have analytics, they know who they reach. And to say, I can use my platform, or like you can use this platform to say, I can hit as many people as possible. With that being said, you're going to have to be concise when you talk about it. You're going to have to say, what is the most important thing that we need to hear? Because people's attention span is about 10 minutes. So you have to really be able to get in there and be concise about what the real issues are, what are the potential impact that if you take this risk in going out, here's the potential impact that you can have, not just for yourself, but so many people, right? It's like, well, I don't have a cough. I'm like, well, a cough is just an extreme version of breathing. If you have it, you know what I mean? Like it's all of these things. So I would like to implore people who have larger platforms to actually allow people who are experts on this field to use their platform to reach as many people as possible. I think that's the easiest way to disseminate this information.
And don't be afraid to do it. You don't want to talk about it because you don't want to upset your audience because
Correct.
of whatever it is. We're past that.
We're past
that.
Right.
Yeah.
So to use conventional ways of thinking about how to use your platform in a time that's so unconventional is not a good place to be. If you wanted to have influence, this is how you can influence people. If you want to see, how nice your titties are and, and how much money you have, then that's cool. But now, now it is a time to use your platform for good, to ensure that people can get the knowledge, particularly people who use mostly social media as a platform to get their news, to give it in a way that is actionable for people. And you're continuously putting it out. You're putting out PSAs, you're creating these things, and you're saying it. And not that you're saying it like, hey, yo, I'm Tiger, or I'm, Megan Thee Stallion, and y'all stay home while I show my ass. It's like, no, hold on. I am Megan Thee Stallion, is going to use my platform to put on Dr. So-and-so, who is going to educate you eloquently about this thing.
And so
that's what
you said something earlier that I thought was interesting. We were talking about how, as far as things that we do in terms of trying to benefit African Americans, and that it's never really been beneficial unless it's affected the bottom line of those in power. Basically systemic racism. Correct. But let's take it a step further. And that being said, how do we address the trust issue? Because we got to circle back to that. Mm-hmm. Let's say the vaccine comes out. Well, let me back up, because the first issue is we're not testing enough. I think the numbers today were with 1 point some odd million people have been tested. They keep talking about that, but they're not talking about what that means in terms of percentages. Kind of like what you said, numbers versus percentages. 1 million plus people tested. Hey, that sounds good. But what about the other 300 some odd thousand, 300 some odd million, people that haven't been tested?
Right. 328.4 million. Yes.
330. Yeah. Some baby's been born. It's 330. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean anything. But I think I'm legit concerned about, and I think a lot of people are, is that, because we've had this horrible, horrible, horrible history in the medical field of testing Black folks, abusing Black folks in the name of science. The whole, we're going to send this test medicine to all of these people in Detroit. Why has it got to be Detroit? Why are you not sending it to Wyoming? Right. And so, of course, now you're amplifying the distrust that we have, while we're also trying to find either a cure, which there isn't going to be one just because of the nature of the virus itself, or a vaccine, which we're going to be naturally distrustful of. Mm-hmm. We just are.
Right. So what I would say is, number one, trust isn't a zero-sum game. Either you trust or you don't. It's what you trust and what you trust about yourself to empower yourself to get the information. So one of the things I say to my patients is, anytime you go to a doctor, write down what you want to know. Mm-hmm. Right. Write it down so you don't have to think about it on the spot. And so that's how you become more educated. Like, hold on, you didn't answer this question. This hydrochloroquine, this does what? This treats malaria and lupus? What about all the people with malaria and lupus? Like, are they getting their medication? Like how do we know that this works? Well, do you want to be a part of a trial study? I just want to get whatever else to help me, as versus saying, well, hold on, what is the best course of action, and what can I do specifically, and what can I do to go home? Right? If I'm going to the doctor and I'm a representation of my family, I can go disseminate that information to my family, versus like, hey, you went to the doctor, how'd it go? I'm good. And you keep it pushing. Like, we have to really implore ourselves that what do we trust? If we distrust them as a zero-sum game, then we won't go as a consequence. We just won't, right? It's either I trust you or I don't. It's like, no, there's levels to this.
Yeah, but
So,
there's got to be, I'm sorry, I mean, cut y'all, but
oh,
you got to put a lot of responsibility on the medical community as well, because there's countless stories of us, we're sick, we go to the ER, they give us a pill, they send us home, because it's
right.
this feeling that we're stronger, we're tougher,
Mhm.
our bones are denser, whatever foolishness, that we
Right.
don't need the same level of care as our white counterparts. And I
Right.
wonder if some of these numbers, and I don't know, this is all hypothetically because we don't have the data. But how many people had symptoms and were sent home, and then they
Yes.
took a turn in 24, 48 hours, and by the time they get back to the hospital, now they're on a ventilator because nobody
Right.
kept them, because they didn't think their symptoms rather were strong enough, or they took the test and they got to wait 4 to 7 days to find
Right.
out,
And they
and then
died
they
in the
go home.
process.
Right.
Right. Yes.
So, I mean, I
Yes.
think a big part of this has to be placed on the backs of the medical profession to take us seriously, but for
Yes.
us also to be able to advocate for ourselves in a way that's going to yield results, and that's hard too, because when we advocate, we're seen as being aggressive, or whatever the case may be, unnecessarily, when we're just trying to get answers, especially in this
Mhm.
case where we don't know so much. But again, so how do you deal with that? How would you tell a patient or somebody who's come to you with that concern? Like, how do I advocate for myself better in the system, which really sees me as somebody who's not as sick as the next person who doesn't look like me?
So I want to give a warning before I mention this. I am not saying to burn down anything, because this is a logical progression that you could say that. But you're going to have to be audacious enough to trust yourself to say, no, what I'm feeling is real.
Mm-hmm.
And that I heard that you feel that this isn't a big deal. This is a big deal to me, and I'm not going anywhere. I have to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to be more eloquent about our symptoms. A lot of times is, well, how you feel? I'm a little warm and sweaty, and you're like, that's it. Versus, no, I have a fever of 101.9, and I have this. So again, that's where talking it out, and that's where the communal nature of our people can really, really help. So I'm going to employ all of our doctors. As opposed to you taking pictures with your lab coat on, why don't you actually get on your feed and with your lab coat and talk
Mm.
about what to do? Stop using this as a fucking vanity project to talk about how dope you are and how smart you are. Use your platform, your knowledge to educate the populace, to say, look, we need to understand how to talk about this, because a lot of disparities in health is simply our inability to communicate appropriately to the proper people what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have a good vocabulary, I cannot be but so specific. So now I have to trust that you're going to take me seriously enough based on the lack of information that I can provide you, which means usually, and that's a matter of availability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it's the ER and it's 3 a.m, it's not a lot of people available. Like, yeah, you come on in. But yeah, if it's full and you like, yo, and that's why, like, no, I'm bleeding. Okay, now we'll triage you. Versus, like, no, I have a fever. This is different, and we need, as a medical profession and people who have the knowledge, to educate the people who don't necessarily have that, or have somebody go with you and say, look, I am going to describe what they told me in a way that is going to talk about the gravity of how important this really, really is. So a lot of times it's just language. If you don't know what to say, people will dismiss you. So we have to, as people who have this knowledge, to educate the populace on how to go to the doctor and say, this is what I'm experiencing. Because a lot of times it's just that difference. Some people are better at communicating their symptoms than others, even though they're feeling the same things.
And so, what do you think the biggest issue that's facing our community now from a socio-political perspective? Are you thinking, is it the election? Is it COVID in its present form? What do you think the biggest issue is that we need to be thinking about now?
I think it's all of the above. So I'm going to try to tie them as much as I can together. I think what's happening now, we're not going to really feel the impact for months or years, right? We're in the grieving phase. We're still in shock.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us are in anger, but we're still really in shock. Like, is
I'm
this really
mad,
happening?
but anyway, go
Oh,
ahead.
and I'm mad too, but anger has to be the emotion of change.
Right.
Right. Not that you get stuck in your own anger, but that your anger charges you to do something to progress this going forward. Now, we're going to now, just like the 2008 housing market, companies will kind of use a market reset to get rid of people they didn't morally and ethically think they can get rid of, because they're like, well, I hired you and I don't have a reason to fire you. Now I have a reason to furlough you, lay you off. But we're going, as a people, what we're going to have to say is this: what is good for us and our people?
Mhm.
And what is, so if you are upper middle class or rich, and you understand, well, look, I want to be, look, essentially my American dream is to be a Christian white male. So I'm going to try everything in my power to do that, but at the expense of my people. Then again, we have to empower the ones of our people who can speak eloquently about this, and not trying to democratize the way we feel, because we all want to feel the same level of power, because we've been in oppression for so long that we all want to feel some level sense of power, versus saying, no, I need to give the people who are better at this a vehicle to be as good as they can be about it, and and then we can be collaborative. We're social people, right? When you look at, most of the countries in Africa, though they have a lot of war, they're also very communal. But now we take this individualistic kind of way of thinking and saying, well, I'm gonna go off to my respective corner and I'm gonna talk to my middle class people and I'm gonna talk to that, my people here, and we're not coming together. So again, I want to implore all of us, if we want to make some actionable change, we need to communicate with each other in a way to disseminate this information and understand how serious this really, really is. Because this is an extreme version of something that has happened for years for us, which is lack of information and people going to their respective corners. And this is just illuminating a problem that has been there for generations. And we need to take this opportunity as an extreme to say, oh my God, how can I look at this not just as something that is happening as COVID-19, but how is this also representative of some disparities that we have had in the past? And then what can we do in order to change the narrative so we can be a more educated populace and hold the people of power, whether it's ourselves or others, put their feet to the fire and say, I need some actionable change that's going to make our society better.
But how does the average person express it though? Because you talk a lot about people who have a position to be able to do that, and to use their
Mm-hmm.
platform to do that. But if we're talking about, this virus that's running rampant through, communities that are obviously densely populated, like Chicago makes perfect sense. Your essential workers, like we said earlier, are people of color. I mean, they're still
Sure.
having to, operate the L's and operate the buses and, do all of those things to keep us moving and keep
Mm-hmm.
us, existing. But everybody's living in close quarters. And frankly, a lot of this, the social distancing isn't even
It's not
realistic.
even right.
Like if you
Exactly.
got 10 people living in a 3-bedroom house, it's impossible. Somebody gets it,
Sure.
everybody's got it. There's nobody, you don't have a nice little bedroom where you can go in quarantine, because you keep
Right.
hearing that on oh, he's in the basement. Who got a basement?
Right.
Like, oh, he's in the
Right.
other bedroom on the other side of the house.
Right.
That's just not how this works. Or just like in jail, like every surface is metal. The toilets are
Yes.
metal, the sinks are metal. Like that. I mean, the rumors here is that there's not enough, even here in Mecklenburg County, they ran out of toilet paper, ran out of hand soap. Like, so if you don't even have those basic things, there's not anything that anybody can do.
Mm-hmm.
How is an inmate going to be able to advocate for himself? Even as attorneys, the frustration is, well, how do you advocate? Because you don't know, one, if the information is accurate. And then two, I can't imagine being an attorney in Chicago and having to deal with that. It's hard enough being in Charlotte, where we don't have, as far as we know, any cases, as far as we know, any
Mm-hmm.
cases in the jail now, but it's just a matter of time. Temperature checks are only going to give you but so much, because especially if the person's asymptomatic and they're not
Right.
running a fever yet, or they test negative. You test negative today, that doesn't mean you're going to get it
You test negative right the next day, right?
tomorrow.
Like,
You
oh,
might
I'm
have
clear. It's like, hold on, are you testing for antibodies? Or are you testing for negative or
exactly.
positive? That's a big distinguishable difference. It's like,
Please
okay, you have
explain.
antibodies.
Like, oh,
So
they're testing negative. Please explain the difference, because that's just driving me crazy. That there's a difference. Go ahead.
testing negative is whether you either have it or you don't. Do you meet the criteria to show that you have enough of the virus in your system to test positive? An antibody is what your body creates, as your immune system creates, as a way to combat it. And
Mhm.
that's why, you know, like a vaccine. We have to get a flu shot every year. Why? Because the virus mutates ever so slightly, so we have to continue to get it, because otherwise, we wouldn't. So like viruses evolve like everything else. So we have to understand, like, hey, I can be negative today, but that doesn't mean I have antibodies to be able to resist the strain. That is different. That's not going to really come into people who, and like, we don't even know what the antibody resistance period is. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be forever. We don't know yet. And I think that's the thing we have to understand. We cannot act as if we have 2 or 3 years worth of knowledge of this. We only have 3 months of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to understand, being tested negative one day. So that's why I like the sports. Like, you see NBA and Major League Baseball, we're going to test. And I'm like, what the hell is that going to do for the next day? That's just saying I don't have it today. That's like, no, like that's analogous to, like, if you feel your spouse is cheating and you check their phone today, the hell I got to do it tomorrow? Like, okay, they ain't do it today.
They deleted it today.
Right, they deleted it today. Like, oh shit. So now you giving, like, you know what I mean? It's like, are you not doing this? Right. You know what I mean? Or so it's like, we really have to understand. And again, that's where an educated populace is really, really important. Testing negative for something that's like saying, oh, I test negative for HIV, so now I'm gonna go out and have sex without a condom. It's like, what? Like, one does not necessarily mean that you can do the other. You're always potentially exposing yourself. So we have to really make that distinction again. And the people who know this need to say this and to get real about this. I was in California, like right around the time they were starting shutting everything down. I was in LA, and I was in a Target with a friend of mine. And I started seeing all these young people. I was like, oh, they about to go. Oh, they about to fuck. Like, it's about to go down. So I made a PSA. Like, I'm like, parents, you need to go get people condoms, because if you do not, you'll have a lot of pregnancies. Why? And people don't want to hear that. It's like, oh, that's crass. But it's like, no, that's the real. That's game. Because how many babies have been born on snow days in North Carolina or anywhere where it's, you know what I mean? So this is just an elongated version of that. From a distancing perspective, you think that somebody who's out of school is not going, to their boo house, particularly if you live in a housing project and that's 700 feet away, like, that ain't hard. So we need to really, really understand, like, and play this out in our heads. What's reasonable for us, as opposed to just trying to use these snippets here and there and trying to put pieces together, as opposed to using the knowledge and the projective nature that we have to inform ourselves and the public.
Awesome. So, okay. So how do people get in touch with you? We're going to circle back on the takeaways, but how do people get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with me at my website, brandonrisher.com. That's Risher is RISHER. And Brandon is BRANDON. You can find me on Instagram, which is Brandon.Risher. Facebook, and you can find me at Brandon.Risher at RisherCWC.com. Which is my work email. So those are ways that you can find me. And like I said, I'm just trying to do whatever I can to help our people.
Are you taking new clients?
Selectively, yes.
So you're not much space left.
No, but that's a good thing. But I also have staff, so
okay,
they have availability.
And so how are you managing that? Are you doing more virtual consultations? Or are you actually still physically seeing people?
No, virtual. No, virtual. Okay. We closed down our office. I think it'll be 3 weeks on Monday.
And so how does that work? Does a patient still feel like do they miss that human interaction? Do they tell you, or do you feel like the virtual is at least somewhat effective?
It's effective. It's not as effective. I mean, I don't like it personally, but I have to. But that's under normal circumstances. Mm-hmm. I have to operate within kind of what's going on. Because there's energy you can have in the room. You can see ticks. You can see, like, people smile, but they smile sometimes to hide tears. That's a way of just a defense mechanism. So you can feel that energy. With that being said, we're all trying to do the best we can. So I implore you, if you feel well, because I can't go into the office, I won't have it. That's not what's up. You need to use the mediums that are available. Like I said, in any time in history, if this were to happen, imagine the 1918 flu as compared to now. We have way more mediums in order to interact and socialize and come together than ever before. So we need to use these mediums to our advantage.
Absolutely. And I think we definitely have to be very mindful of the vote primary season that's coming for a lot of states that postponed it. We didn't get into what's going on in Wisconsin. We don't have 2 more hours because I could talk about that for an hour by itself. But it's a clear sign of fear of losing power and control in Wisconsin. The lines of people standing for hours to vote, nullifying votes. That's a whole nother show. I can't. I just can't. But it's frightening to see that something can be. It just really highlights the fact of how important it is how important your vote is beyond just what happens on a national level. It's the local elections that have the greatest impact on a person's daily lives. It certainly made it was very glaring there because all of that what you saw in Wisconsin on the news was based on the Supreme Court, which was only slightly conservative leaning, and their ability to try to push the election so they could keep one particular conservative judge in hopes, well, people aren't going to come out because they're not going to want to be out and all this, and low voter turnout always leans Republican. That's just
Correct.
That's just
It
tradition.
always does, right? Because they're more engaged. And I'll say this: let's say if Trump gets another 4 years, how many people?
Oh my God.
Hold on. I'm saying, no, I'm saying this. No, hold on.
Damn it, Brandon. We were doing so good.
I'm saying this as a projective measure. If he gets reelected, look at the ages of the people on the Supreme Court. How many of them are going to be there in 2024? So just for that alone, so as using Wisconsin as an example, if you don't think this is real or that the presidency is just a figurehead, you have to understand that his ability to appoint people in the Supreme Court or whether it's the state or the national level is so important. So you may not care about what he does, but if you care about legislation that is going to actually impact you on a day-to-day, that's what's important.
Okay, we good. Because I sure was getting ready to put my finger over this webcam in this broadcast. But no, that's real talk. That's real talk. And hopefully the shift of people seeing reality and not just voting on whatever's happening economically, that they can see the bigger picture. I'm really concerned. That's probably for another show, like how Democrats and independents are going to really look at this in the long run, because I think you hit the nail on the head. There'll probably be another stimulus check in September or so, or some sort of announcement of it, try to put some more money in people's pockets so they can feel good about what's happening and hopefully forget about these deaths. And I wonder even if the projected number went from 100 to 200,000, now it's around 60. Is that playing around with the numbers? So you feel like, oh, it could have been so much worse. Because that's what the line's going to be. Oh my God, it could have been 200,000, but we only had 60, and how awesome that is.
I would say superimpose that number with the market. So always look at the number and what the market is doing and see, because there's always an agenda. And that's the power, the bullhorn of the presidency. He or whomever it may be can influence the market. So if he says, look, because you all have been doing well, we've cut the projections in half. But I just also saw that the federal government is also not going to continue to fund testing on a state level. So you have to understand, we can. Oh, it's very easy to get the numbers down. But how are they doing it? And that's what an educated populace has to understand. I can get the numbers down to 0 if I don't test. But who does that impact? So that's what we have to understand. So I just say one more thing. I do have a show on Square Media, The Slant.
I was getting to that.
Okay, my bad. I just wanted to say that. Well, then you please.
All right. So for those of you who are watching, okay.
I just forgot because you asked me how to get in touch with me. I was like,
coming to that. Good grief. So yes. So for those of you watching now, obviously you're tuning in on the recorded version. Brandon has his own show, which I don't know what day it airs, but it's called The Slant. And you're in your second season?
My second season.
You're in your second season. It's on Square Media Network. And I think, is it Thursdays? Please remind me. Tuesday.
Every second and fourth Tuesday of the month.
And tell us about what's the premise of the show.
So the premise is I'm just trying to get my slant or my angle on a particular topic. So whether it's something mental health related, whether it's something political, whether it's something educational, I'm just trying to give a different slant or a different take on something that's different than conventional wisdom kind of says. So that's the premise of the show.
Very good. All right. Thank you, Brandon. I so
you.
appreciate you. We did good. We only almost had a breakdown at the end. We did good. So y'all definitely reach out to him if you need help. Can they ask questions of you if they have
Sure.
questions? Okay.
Absolutely.
And can you repeat the email address and repeat the website one more time?
Yes. So the website is brandonrisher.com. You can reach me there. You can also reach me at Brandon, BRANDON.RISHER at rishercwc.com.
Excellent. And then, of course, if you haven't already done so, make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe everything social media, all things social media at the Convo Pod Show. The episode that features Julie will be up on tomorrow, actually. And then next week, we will be tackling I'm not even going to tell you. You'll see. But we're tackling a major, major issue, talking about politics, but in a very different way. And then we need to get back to a fitness show because I know all of us on this struggle bus. What is this, week 3? Are we in week 3?
So.
I don't even know what day it is. Is it Thursday? Something like that.
I think so.
But we got to talk, y'all. We got to have some real talk about, how we coming out of this Rona. Are we coming out fabulous or flabby? We got to make some choices, and we have to make choices in the long term, and we can't use being at home as an excuse. So we're going to be talking about interesting and creative ways to get in some exercise. A lot of things you can do at home, a lot of things that are accessible on YouTube and things of that nature. So we'll be talking about that. Thank you again, Brandon. Cheers, sir. Welcome. Enjoy the rest of your night and your libations. Thank you guys for tuning in. And we will see you all next week. Have a good night. Bye.